Well, hello there. I'm your host, Isaiah. I'm here doing an O&B special, and it's a show we didn't really plan upon, but I'll tell you what, I'm glad we're here. We're brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com, Summit Adjusters, Jim South Street, and of course, we're featured on HockeyHotStove.com. Go to the site, HockeyHotStove.com, scroll down, and you'll see the O&B Puckcast insignia. It'll click on the link, and it'll take you right to all of our YouTube shows. And of course, we're live today. And I was going to say tonight. We're live today on YouTube. If you could subscribe, give us a like, and certainly hit that notification bell. So the next time an O&B Puckcast is up, you can be ready for that. And you won't be surprised like we were that we're going to do a show this week, because we're going to do one for next week. But I'm really glad we're here, because I think we're at a critical juncture in the Flyers season. And I think it's important that we talk a little bit about it with the Anthony DiMarco from dailyfaceoff.com, who should be joining us shortly. So just a reminder before we get going that, and hey, Anthony, how are you?
How are you? How are you, Isaiah?
Oh, doing all right. Just wanted to let the people know, because Chef is not here, that if they have home damage in PA, New Jersey, and Delaware, don't call your insurance company right away. Now, you don't want to do that. You want to call Summit Adjusters, because they are experienced in handling claims for home damage, and you'll get much, much more before for your claim. If you go right to the insurance company, you could say one wrong thing, and you could get virtually a minimal amount or nothing like you would have had you called Summit Adjusters at 215-752-0560, 215-752-0560 for Summit Adjusters. Anthony, the Flyers have gone 0-2-1 since our last show. They're now 22-14 and 8 for 52 points through 44 games. They're currently out of a playoff spot as we record before the Buffalo game, but they played fewer games than most of the other teams are competing against, with the exception of tonight's opponent, the Sabres. On the other hand, they have the least number of regulation wins among all of those playoff contenders. Now, they have 12 games in the next 23 days headed into the Olympics in February, and it feels like an inflection point, hence the name of our show tonight, in the season where their playoff destiny could be determined, especially as some season-long negative trends seem to be catching up to them. And we'll address that tonight. What is going on between the pipes, particularly the backup goalie position with the Philadelphia Flyers? You wrote about it today on dailyfaceoff.com.
Hey, Isaiah, and thanks for dealing with me a bit. I'm actually trying the podcast sitting down. So it's the first time I'm going to sit down for duration since my back injury. So, and thank you for everyone for the kind of wishes on Twitter and whatnot, and you as well. But yeah, between the pipes, I mean, I don't want to be a rumor monger or a clickbait guy that maybe Charlie kind of insinuated yesterday. I'm just joshing with you, Charlie. Yeah. But no, I think it's the first time that when I spoke to sources with the Flyers, that there was actually like an appetite. All this before was just like, we're going to ride with Urson. We have long since thought that these were the years, this year and last, that we're going to figure out what we have with these guys. I remember when they brought over Fedotov and Kolosov in the spring of 2024, they said that from 24 to 26, these are the 2 seasons where we're going to figure out what we have with these 2 guys and Urson. They already figured out what they have with Kolosov. They jettisoned him in the Columbus Blue Jackets, or more so the Cleveland Monsters. I think you're starting to figure out what you have with Alexei Kolosov. That now that he has his head on straight, he's actually developing on a path that probably makes more sense. And probably where he would have been last year had he not been so all over the map headspace-wise. But I think now that you're halfway through the season, or more than halfway through the season, and 3 quarters through this 2-season sample size, maybe the Flyers are starting to figure out what they have with Samuel Urson. And I think I wrote my first story back in November that they still wanted to give him a chance. They liked how he battled and that he was still getting wins. And I think that's the big thing, is that even though Urson was struggling early in the season, he was still getting wins. That's not the case anymore. I don't think Urson is really getting wins. It seems like every time they get a win, it's Dan Vladar in the net. And with less shootouts around, there's not like that great shootout performance that Urson always seems to pull out to kind of gloss over all the negativity leading up to the shootout. So, look, it is fair to note that there aren't a lot of good goaltenders in the NHL, but for the first time now, if you go on moneypuck.com, maybe it's a bit of an arbitrary number, but among goalies who have started at least 5 games, Urson, I believe, is bottom 10, 9th from the bottom in goals saved above expected per 60. And the goaltenders behind him aren't that great. So all in all, it seems like it's the first time that the Flyers are seriously considering a change. Not that it's imminent, but I think that Urson is almost at the end of his runway.
Yeah, I think even taking that further, if you look at a few more numbers, I mean, we know what we're looking at. But 858 save percentage. I think he ranks he's last among in 858 among goalies who have played at least a dozen games. Is dead last.
Really?
And yeah, at least a dozen games, he's last. So, I mean, it used to be with Urson that you can make the case that they weren't playing as well in front of him. The type of chances he was facing were actually greater than what we were seeing in front of Vladar. In other words, they were playing better in front of Vladar, and they would come out with a victory, or Sam would give up that untimely goal or unfortunate, a squeegee, whatever, but he would make up for it, like you said earlier, in a shootout, because he was very good in shootouts. Now it seems like everything's kind of fallen down. And, if you read Anthony Sanfilippo, and I don't know if it's just his particular opinion or it's a mixture like maybe yours, he's hearing from people and he has his own opinion. Something has to change. And that something, your first stop would be Kolosov. The problem with that, Anthony, is like you said, Kolosov is actually back on track after missing a year of being, basically recalcitrant. And now he's kind of where he needs to be.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, he is the guy in Lehigh. And look, I don't believe Carson. I think Bjarnason got off to a good start, but now he's kind of petered off a little bit. And if you call up Kolosov, and people may scoff at this, that maybe are just like Flyers centric, if you're waiving Urson, there's a good chance that he gets claimed by someone. That's just unfortunately the nature of the NHL right now. And like, look, like we all know the Linus Ullmark story. I don't think he's ever playing in Ottawa again. Their goaltender, Merrilainen, I believe analytically has been the worst goaltender in the NHL, if I'm not mistaken. They just signed James Reimer. And like, I don't know, if I'm Ottawa and you're losing out on, let's say Ullmark is never going to play again, I would pick up Urson, who's somewhat cost controlled as a restricted free agent. And again, you could be like, oh, well, Urson sucks. Well, it's not so much about Urson. I would bet a decent amount of money that this juncture, his future with the Flyers is very much in question. But it's more about, like, what does that do to Bjarnason? So what, now you got to go out and try and find another goalie. So I guess my point is, and to piggyback off of you, Isaiah, is that, like, I don't think recalling Alexei Kolosov is the best thing. Because as much as the Flyers want to win now, and maybe they're hedging a little bit, which is an argument in and of itself, or are they doing it the right way and whatever, I don't think that they want to F with a good thing, if you will. I think he was player of the game last week in the AHL, which was specifically pointed out to me by a source when I spoke to them on Monday. And you don't want to throw Bjarnason to the wolves, and you don't want to be left with no competent backup. Like, imagine a scenario where Carson Bjarnason and Alexei Kolosov are your two goalies in the NHL. If you waive Urson, he gets picked up, and let's say Vladar gets like a week or two injury. Like, that's nightmare fuel. And even if people are just like, oh, no, it's good, let's tank. No, I'm talking about for development. It just wouldn't be good if you rush a goalie into the NHL. And I think at times you could have made that argument about Carter Hart too, that he was rushed too fast and maybe his talent overcame it, and a good team like kind of steadied the waters for him. But it wasn't linear with Carter Hart. So I mean, I think that keeping Alexei Kolosov in the AHL, and again, this is my opinion, kind of like an informed opinion, but like reading the tea leaves, like I think that keeping Alexei Kolosov with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms and not messing with that good situation is something that the Flyers would prefer to do.
Okay. So that begs the question. It's kind of like a tug of war here. What's more important, this stretch where they could essentially play their way out of the playoffs with really bad goaltending from Sam Marsan, because they have so many back-to-backs. They're going to
Yeah.
need somebody besides Vladar. And of course, hanging, I guess, in the background is the obvious concern that Vladar has never played more than, was it 29 games in a
Yep.
season.
Which is
So
fair.
there's a lot of issues. It begs the question, are the Flyers willing to take a chance to go out and get somebody else? Which begs another question. Okay, well, who is there? I've heard names like Alex Lyons, who's currently injured right now. And why would Buffalo give him up even if he's injured? Because they're making their move, and then the Flyers are going to see them for the second time in a couple weeks, and they're on fire since they hired a new GM, as crazy as that is.
You know, I was speaking to my colleague, well, somewhat colleague, Dave Pagnotta, at least on the production side of things yesterday. And I was just like, really, the new GM bump? And he's just like, well, when players think that there's an actual organizational direction, sometimes it gives you more enthusiasm to actually play, because clearly Kevin Adams and his staff didn't know what they were doing. But, you know, the Sabres, like, good not to spend too much time on them, but they've been hit hard with injuries, especially on the back end, like 2 right shot defensemen, Connor Timmins and Michael Kesselring, who came over in that JJ Peterka deal, a deal that is actually looking pretty good for the Buffalo Sabres, as they also got Josh Doan in that move. But I asked specifically this source about Alex Lyon. It was not brought up to me, just because I look around the NHL and there aren't many teams with like steady, like rock solid, steady goaltending positions. Now, maybe the Minnesota Wild do, with 2 of the best 10 goalies in the NHL with Gustafsson and Jesper Wallstedt. You know, I think both of those guys made Team Sweden. Like, what a job that Bill Guerin has done. Could you believe that he acquired Philip Gustafsson for Cam Talbot 1-for-1? How crazy is that?
Yeah. I think the biggest coup in goal over like the last year and a half was Colorado swapping out both goaltenders and immediately getting an incredible improvement in net. It shows it can be done, but you have to strike early and be bold. I'm sorry, but as you were saying about, you know, Minnesota after Buffalo,
Yeah, so I don't think that they just extended Wallstedt, they just extended Gustafsson. I think the Wild are going to keep that 2-headed monster intact as long as they can. And I don't think the Flyers are really looking to go after that high-end goaltender. Like, Vladar has clearly proven to be a more than competent starter. I think they like what they have in Kolosov. You're still trying to figure out Bjarnason at a young age. Everyone talks about Zabragan, but you need a competent backup in the interim. And I just looked at Alex Lyon. Obviously, he is injured, but I mean, that was it. I actually asked about Ellis or Lyon because I don't think the Sabres are in a hurry to move UPL, because with Devin Levi still kind of struggling, someone who grew up 15 minutes away from me, actually. But like, I think UPL is the guy that they want to keep as the starter. But all in all, like, how it was phrased to me is like, no, Colton Ellis, there's not enough like sample size in the NHL. I think he's only played in the NHL this season. And Alex Lyon is a more than competent backup. I think his save percentage is over 900. He's had good numbers the last few years with the Detroit Red Wings. So, I mean, I think there's an appetite certainly to go after an Alex Lyon for, I think, a mid to later round pick. I think I phrased it as like a 3rd round pick or whatever. And I know you and I had briefly spoken about it over text. But I think, again, it's not quite there yet, but it's the first time that I spoke to sources that indicate that, like, they're actually considering a move now.
I mean, it's something that definitely could sink their season in this 12-game stretch up in, the run up to the Olympics. There's a couple other hot topics out there that I wanted to explore that fans are really talking about right now. So before we leave the goaltending, like, what's it going to take for the Flyers to either make some kind of trade for somebody, we don't know who? Oh, by the way, I just want to give credit to Charlie and Bill over at PHLY for bringing up that name, Alex Lyon. I think we had brought it up in private discussions or something like that. That's also,
and it was also in my article yesterday.
Oh, okay, all right. So I don't want to people think I'm just bogarting the information like it's only ours.
Yeah,
We're
I
all
think
talking
I think
about
they
it.
were talking about my article or just before my article. It all kind of came out at the same time.
Yeah, just want to be cool about it. So, what do you think they're going to do? If let's just say 12 out of 23, let's say there's 6 games into that 12 game stretch. They've already lost 3 in a row, or 0-2-1 if you want, and 6 games. They have a potential of 12 points, and they get something like 4, and it's really dire. And the goaltending is the real indictment, particularly the backup goaltending. What do you think happens?
Well, look, I'm going back, let's say, a month or so. I'm going back to December 18th against the Buffalo Sabres, let's say. Or you know what? Let's go back a full month against December 13th against the Carolina Hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
Alex Lyon has come away with 1 win. His record is 1-2-2. And again, it's a little arbitrary and my math is not great, so bear with me. So that in a 5-game stretch there, he has let in 3 or more goals in all but 1. He's let in 4 or more goals in all but 2. And in the last 2 outings, he's let in 7 and 5, respectively. Now, how it was phrased to me back in November was, yes, he's not playing great, but he's battling and he's finding ways to pull out wins and points. That's what, barely a 500-point percentage for Samuel Ersson over the last 5 games. I think that they're going to look at his individual play coupled with how many points he's getting. Now, look, the Chicago game right before Christmas was probably his best outing of the season, where he stopped 20 of 21 shots.
Mm-hmm.
But I think his last 2 outings in particular, you could say were 100% his fault. And I don't think that's hyperbolic by any stretch. And if you go back to the game before Chicago, where he let in 4 and in the overtime loss, I think you could say was 100% his fault. Maybe Tampa, you do lose regardless. I guess you could say like, oh, maybe they only lose 3 or 4-2. But in guaranteed, in 2 of his last 4 starts, he's been the issue and the focal point of the loss. So I think that they're looking about how many wins can you scrape out with your backup goalie in net. And I think that's just a trend that they're going to keep to look at. So, I don't know exactly the sample size that they're looking for before they pull the trigger or before they say, okay, no, we can make it work with this guy. But just how it was phrased to me back in November is we're still getting points with him. And I guess if you go back the last month, they still are getting more than 500 points percentage. But I just think it's really starting to skid in the wrong direction. And, with 12 goals allowed in the last 2 games, I think maybe honestly, with where things are in the standings, and it also depends on availability of other goaltenders, because I really don't think that they want to bring up Alexei Kolosov. I think over his next outing or so, we may actually get a more of an idea as to where this thing is going.
Okay. The other 2 issues right now are big. In addition to the backup goaltending, the power play has come to the fore. It cost them the game against Toronto. There's no doubt about it. They shouldn't even we shouldn't even have gone to overtime.
Yeah.
And that's been a disappointment now for 5-6 years running. It really have been the same since Ron Hextall arrogantly fired Joey Mullen and blamed him for a little bit less of a performance. And they've just, I call it the curse of Joey Mullen for a reason. So they need a power play quarterback. They're going to get a net front presence, hopefully next year with Martone. Is Dougie Hamilton even on their radar?
I've been asked about it. It's an interesting name for sure. It's very peculiar what the hell has gone on with Dougie Hamilton in New Jersey. It seems like 24 months ago they were like the sexy pick, and me too. I was guilty of it to win the Stanley Cup, and all of a sudden it's just completely collapsed in on itself. And you're scratching a guy who they signed Dougie Hamilton in 2022, I believe it was, to a big 7-year contract. And I remember that year, it was either his first or second year in New Jersey where him and Jonas Siegenthaler were like the best defensive pair in the NHL. And overall, they had a really good defense. You bring in Brett Pesce, you bring in Brendan Dillon to offset maybe the younger style defensemen of Luke Hughes and Simon Nemec. But I mean, he would check a box. I mean, I think he's on the larger side. He's not so much a punisher. I mean,
Yeah,
theoretically,
he's
I
six
guess.
four. But
Yeah,
he goes to museums. He doesn't go, to the boxing, training.
yeah. Maybe kind of cut from like from a physicality standpoint, probably cut from more of a Travis Sanheim cloth.
Right.
But I mean, like, look, like if you
6'6",
bring in,
actually. Okay.
yeah, so he's a monster. I think his cap hit is what, right around $8 million.
Nine. It's nine
Nine.
for
Okay.
2 more years. It's 2 more years after this. So it's actually not
It's
too bad.
it's not bad. The thing, if you bring in Dougie Hamilton, and it also depends what you're doing with Risto, right? If
Yeah,
you're bringing
Bristow will probably have to go. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's say hypothetically, you could fit him in this year. I think they have like $30 million in deadline cap space. You would imagine that Emil Andre is the one that gets jettisoned out of there. I mean, that's just the assumption, because it just seems like Andre's the guy that if they add a defenseman, he's the one on the way out, at least in the interim, because of the size thing. So you're not, because since Risto has come back, I mean, I would have to really look at the ice time, but I think Andre is kind of, as far as ice time goes, been playing like fifth or sixth like minutes. Now, obviously, Drysdale's been out the past few games, so that's kind of skewed things. But I know Risto's been playing north of 20, and I think Sealer and Andre are kind of like jockeying for who's like fifth on the totem pole as far as ice time goes.
Mm-hmm.
So again, let's go with the assumption that Andre's the guy out of the starting rotation. Bring in Hamilton as a right shot guy kind of makes you rejig everything. And you presumably at that point, at least in my mind, you would have a very balanced top six. But I guess your top pair becomes what, Sanheim and Hamilton? And then you go with York and Risto and Sealer and Drysdale. That's
I don't
kind
know.
of the way.
I think if not Risto, but if Hamilton hasn't been up to snuff, if you get him in a lower pair, you put Sanheim and York, I would leave that alone, and maybe you want Drysdale. See, that's why I think it's possible it could be Risto leaving, because the contract, the age, like how much do you want to invest in guys that are kind of like on the back nine? Risto's certainly like that. Hamilton is a 2011 draft, I believe. The same draft as
he was. Yeah, the pick after.
Right. He's the guy we should have taken. But anyway, it might be.
Well, I remember, like, not to go back in the time machine, but I think, they're just like, oh my God, we traded Carter and we traded Richards. We got to load up on centerman. And it's funny. I was speaking with someone, and again, not to get too sidetracked here.
Yeah.
But I think we were talking about maybe Jet Luchenko or something like that, about him making the NHL too early. And how it was framed to me was just like, well, the problem with letting a guy make the NHL too early, and you see a lot of people say like, oh, just litter it with kids, fourth line center, Jet Luchenko, all that. They're just like, look what happened with Sean Couturier. He made the NHL and was essentially the fourth line center under Peter Laviolette that first year.
Yeah.
And got barely any power play time. And look, he was never like an offensive stalwart, but I remember him in the Quebec majors. Like I think he got mono in his draft year.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to go number one. He was supposed to go number one, but I think his offensive game never really developed accordingly because of how Peter Laviolette used him early on. And then even later on, Craig Berube did the same thing. Like, how many years was Matt Reed stapled to Sean Couturier's side?
Yeah.
Like,
I was just going to say that whatever offense Couturier showed in like that 3-4 year period where he was kind of like the guy, he could score 70 points, and be a Selke like guy. I think it emerged. It took longer to emerge. I think he could have hit the ground running, and they probably could have got another 2, maybe even 3 years of offensive productivity that we never saw because they rushed him. They rushed hard, like you were saying earlier. They rushed Couturier. Look, it's what the Flyers do, and they keep saying they don't want to do it. So that's the concern. But I think that getting back to the defenseman, I think that I would think that Risto would go, but because you would be kind of old on defense, and you're waiting for Bonk, but Bonk could take a whole other year after next. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and look, you would have a lot of money invested. And Drysdale's up for a new contract as well, right? So like presuming Drysdale gets, I would say around, I don't know, $4 or $5 million, because I think he's going to kind of be like there's going to be a ceiling with Drysdale because of the York contract. Like your lowest paid defenseman would come in at Sealer at what he makes 2.75.
Yeah, I'm checking on that. I think that sounds right.
Yeah, and like, look, you could ride it out for a year. Like I know, like, like I know Charlie was talking about it, where he said, how did Charlie put it? That like, he doesn't think Risto's actually going to be like a major trade target, and you know what? He's probably right. But he is available for trade. But if they don't get a Brandon Carlo type of return, they could hang on to him, and then Risto as a pure rental next year might get you even more, depending on how teams look at it. Now, but I'm saying is like for this season, because you could always trade Risto in the summer. Because I always say this, it's like, you don't think that there's a team that would sign Ristolainen to a 1 year, $5 million contract this summer? Like 1,000%.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So like, maybe for this, and again, I haven't heard Hamilton. We're just spitballing. The only thing with Hamilton is that it effectively pushes Sanheim back to the left side. That's what it does. Because then you have Drysdale, Hamilton, and Ristolainen in no particular order, 1 through 3. So me just kind of looking at it is like your shutdown, or unless you go Sanheim Risto, and that's your pure shutdown pair, and you just load up, and you can make the case that when they're both at the top of their games, those are the best stoppers that they have on the team. That's your pure shutdown pair. Then you go with a very smooth, like puck moving
York and Drysdale,
Hamilton, or York and Hamilton.
Oh yeah.
And we know that Sealer and Drysdale has historically worked. And with the way Drysdale's playing, and you have Drysdale and Sealer kind of as and we know how the Flyers defense is that their struggle is moving the puck and generating offense. So if you have like a shutdown pair with Sanheim and Risto, and then your third pair is another quasi shutdown pair with Drysdale and Sealer, and maybe you can interchange Drysdale and Ristolainen if, let's say, an offensive zone draw or defensive zone draw. But then the York and Hamilton pair is that puck moving pair to get out there with the Zegrases, the Konecnys, the Michkovs, the Tippets. And maybe that also unlocks something in York. Like it's very obvious that they're trying to unlock York's offensive side. It's very obvious.
But the main driver behind even thinking about it is the power play. I mean, it is costing them points, and it's a salvage operation to acquire him. And I don't even know, would we make a trade with Jersey? Would Jersey make a trade with us? It depends on whether it's and what would the cost be? So there's a lot of considerations. I don't think it's a very likely thing to happen, but I wouldn't blame the Flyers for taking a shot at it.
No, for sure not. Yeah. And again, not to cut you off, I had not even thought about it. I hadn't, but I do think that I don't think Dougie Hamilton's game just completely like fell off a cliff. Like it's just like there is something to be said. Is like, imagine like maybe Siegenthaler's game's fallen off, and you're trying to force feed Luke Hughes certain minutes, and you're trying to develop Simon Nemec. Like the Flyers don't have any. What I like about the Flyers defense this year is that like everyone is kind of like, we kind of know what they are, more or less. Is like yes, you're trying to unlock York's game offensively, and maybe you're trying to squeeze a bit more out of Drysdale, but I think we know, like, as odd as it is, like Drysdale is just a 5-on-5 defenseman. He's not good on either special teams per se. And we know what Sanheim is, we know what Sealer is, Risto is even better probably than what we expected. And the other two we know as well, but it's like, okay, maybe you have Andre a bit, but if you bring Hamilton in and you plug him in, to your point, as a 3-4, and he's the top power play guy, and he's not having to like be pushed aside because they're trying to force feed minutes to the Nemeches and the Luke Hughes like in Jersey, maybe it works out.
Yeah, maybe it bears watching. I'll put it that way. So I think that's kind of where that is. I think the power play, I don't have any other solutions to their power play. I really don't know. We've had this problem for so long, other than getting somebody else from the point who has good vision, who can get shots through, someone could really bomb, has a bomb back there, or a net front guy. I don't, it seems like it's yet another thing they're going to have to worry to address next year, unless they make one of those moves. That's it. So, Matvey Michkov, popular opinion right now, a little controversy. What's your stance in terms of like who is really responsible for what his play has been? Is clearly a sophomore slump. I mean, he hasn't scored a goal other than an empty netter.
Yeah.
Since November 29th.
Yeah, like look, like I mean, it's clearly become like a war, and like Kevin Kurz now is right in the middle of it, and Godspeed to Kevin. And I hate to like kind of take the coward's way out, but I think like a lot of things can be true at the same time. Look, I think Charlie mentioned it on his show yesterday that one thing that he did find maybe peculiar is that like Tocchet went out of his way to point out like Celebrini being in really good shape. And maybe, you know, maybe Tocchet is a guy who, I think I made the joke the other day, like that he hates fat people. Obviously, that's not the case. But, you know, like I saw Tocchet up close. I was just like, oh, this guy's jacked and he's 60 years old. You know, maybe, and I think I spoke about this on your podcast or another one. It was, in my mind, it's like, okay, like you have this guy who's supposed to be like the focal point of this rebuild, and everything is kind of centered around him. The GM and the president literally picked him up at the airport 18 months ago or however long ago it was, and you show up out of shape. And it's just probably like a sign of a lack of discipline, which it is. But at the same time, he's 20 years old, and I think Kevin said this today on Morning Cup of Hockey. He's 20 years old, and he goes back overseas with his buddies with a pocket full of cash, and he effed up, and that's fine. So it's probably Michkov's fault because you didn't take it seriously, and you came into a season where the Flyers finally did add significant pieces to the roster. As much as people like to say, like, oh, they haven't added anyone. Well, that's not true. Vladar, Dvorak, and Zegras, and I find Dvorak's looking more skilled every game, and not to like try and justify that contract, but he hasn't slowed down at any point. But I also am of the belief that I don't think Tocchet has used him particularly well. Specifically, I don't get the insistence on the left wing. I think even when he moved up the other night to play with Zegras and Dvorak, that he had Zegras go to the right and Michkov stay on the left. And maybe that's because he's very prone to turning the puck over right now. So you want him on his strong side. So it's easier to kind of push the puck down the wall.
Well, that's the thing. He's trailing the play as it is. And if he has to shift over, then it's that couple extra steps that he has to make up for it. He just has never made up with it. You know, since he came into camp, he's been a step behind most of the year.
Yeah, and I could agree with that. I just think that there are some times where it's just like, okay, you're moving him up to play with the best centerman and the best winger on the team right now in Zegras and Dvorak. Why are you going to screw with even Zegras' game? Why are you going to move Zegras from the left to the right? And look, I agree with everything you said. I agree with what Kevin has said about trailing the play and the turnovers and all that. But at the same time, every time Michkov makes a really good play, I think it comes from him peeling back when he hits the half wall on his off wing and using his body to shield the puck and making a really good facilitation to another player. Mm-hmm. So I think that you kind of have to find a balance here of like, yes, he does, like you have to go send guys out based on merit, but at the same time, you have to put guys in a position to succeed. And for me, playing Michkov on the left wing with Noah Cates and Bobby Brink isn't that. I could also concede that like Denver Barkey, and I think it was Dan Knightley, I'll give him credit here. Dan Knightley said that Barkey has unlocked something with Owen Tippett. And I do think that there's a lot of chemistry there. And I think Barkey's one of the few wingers who could keep up with Tippett's pace of play. And I think that's why it's very go, go, go. And it works with Couturier in the middle, who takes care of responsibly. So it is also about you're trying to fit him in somewhere. I just think that, like, you have to find a way to adapt his game. Like, now Brink is out of the lineup tonight. I didn't get a full chance to look at the lines. But, like, if he has to go play with Noah Cates, let's say, like, play him on the right wing and put Nikita Grabenkin on the left. Find a way to get him at least in some capacity in a position to succeed, while also not just giving him well, like, look, he's playing tonight based on daily faceoffs lines that were cited, and they cite Jackie Spiegel. He's playing on the left wing with Sean Couturier and Carl Grundstrom.
Yeah. I
Like,
was
for me
looking that
here,
up.
it's just like, yeah. So like, I don't get why. And Denver Barkey, I guess, is scratched or he's hurt.
He's scratched. No, he's been
Or
fighting
he's
it.
not in the lineup.
Right. Yeah. He needed time
Yeah.
off.
So Barkey's been fighting it a bit. So
Yeah.
yeah, which is fine. But I'm like, this is a situation where I'm saying, like, why are we putting him on the left wing with Sean Couturier and Carl Grundstrom? Like, for me, swap Tippett and Mitch, swap Grundstrom and Grundstrom, put Tippett on the left and put Michkov on the right in some capacity. Like for me, I think you're wasting Owen Tippett here. Maybe you could find some chemistry with Grebenkin because Grebenkin does have wheels and can play with pace. But I just think that these line combinations are maybe a bit of an example that, like, Tocchet doesn't always put players in a position to succeed. And it's not exclusive to Michkov either.
Here's the thing, though. They're coming off getting waxed 12-3 in 2 games versus Tampa Bay, right? Where it was kind of like a revelation. Like, yeah, we're not even in their league. Now, it's true. Tampa Bay is on a heater. The Flyers are on a downturn. But I don't blame them for shaking it up and seeing if he can get something going. I mean, the lines tonight are Coots centering, Grundstrom and Michkov. I don't like that line. Dvorak centering Konechny, Zegras, Cates between Tippett and Grebenkin, and then you have Obels with Hathaway, and I have Delorier in the lineup tonight. I think Barkey will come back soon enough. Although I heard Anthony Sanfilippo talking he thinks that ultimately that Barkey, if he keeps fighting it, is probably going to go back to Lehigh Valley, and the strength deficit that they thought they were worried about is now starting to take its toll, especially with so many back-to-back games for a kid that probably needs an extra 5 to 7 pounds of muscle.
Yeah, for sure. And like, look, I don't think that you should jeopardize Barkey's long-term development, but I agree. Like, this middle six, like, okay, the fourth line, I think Hathaway's really kind of turned things around, and maybe that reset is what he needed.
Yeah.
I think he's been playing better. Delorier is Delorier. So for me, it's like, I look at that middle six and it's like, why are you splitting Michkov and Tippett? That's just for me. Like, even if you want to put Grebenkin with Couturier and Grundstrom and that's your shutdown line, like, I would rather give Cates, Michkov, and Tippett a look, because I think that's more conducive to a long-term second line than Sean Couturier. And we've seen Michkov stapled to Couturier's left wing. I know Couturier is a great captain and he knows, and blah, 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 blah. But it's just like, when I look at that middle six, I'm saying, like, they're not going to score. That's it. And that's frustrating because, like, for me, it's just very obvious. And okay, I'm just a guy in Montreal here, but it's like, Grundstrom's a natural left wing. Tippett's played more left than right in his career with the Flyers. And all of a sudden, you're forcing Michkov on the left. And it's like, this is your opportunity to see if, like, okay, we're going to put him with Tippett. Isaiah, would you rather have Michkov with Couturier or Cates? I think that they should give Cates more of a look in an offensive role.
Well,
and maybe it's like 4 quarters for $1, like.
Yeah, I think it is. I think I would try Michkov out again on the right side because he's really in a funk, and you got to do something to get him out of it. The first thing I'm critical about Tocchet with the power play, you got to get that guy on the power play and get him on the first unit. Okay. The problem is, I think Tocchet is applying a merit-based system to the point where you're not putting the player in the best position to succeed.
Like, cutting off your nose to spite your face, almost.
Yes, in essence. In other words, he has a systematic way of handling players, and I think you got to think a little bit outside the box with this guy because he's really talented. Of course, on the other hand, the problem is his turnovers are egregious. His puck handling, and he's forcing things, especially between the blue lines, where it's killer, and it just ends up in the back of your net. And I know Kevin in his article described a couple different plays where I think there were 3 different plays, and 2 ended up in the back of the Flyers' net. And the other one created a dangerous chance. I see this with him all the time. The other problem with Michkov that I'm having right now is that he's not engaging on the boards. I remember when Tortorella talked about Bobby Brink, and he said he really doesn't know how to check. Bobby Brink took that to heart, and now he really battles on the boards like I didn't think he'd ever get to that point. And to watch a guy like Michkov see the improvement Bobby Brink made last year and come back so timid on the boards of late. I'm disappointed in Michkov's conditioning, his lack of battle. Obviously had that really strong board play in Nashville earlier in the season. It's like that's the Michkov we remember from last year. He's lost that dog, and a lot of that is the confidence. So I think you could help the player and help the team by putting on that first power play, put him back on the right wing. And, we have the Olympic break coming up. I would try to do something different with this player because of going back to the main theme of the show. It's a critical juncture, and you do not want to fall behind and out of the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So then by the time the Olympics are over and you're back in, now you're trailing by maybe 6 points. And with all the 3-point games, it may be too much for them to surmount, even if they make changes in goal and they start going desperate. And that's the thing I have. So to me, it's a mixed bag. It starts with the player, the compete level, not being in shape, getting discouraged, and then Tocchet taking him off the first unit for a power play that's not working anyway. And you've tried the left wing experiment. Remember who was it? The coach for Washington, Dale Hunter. Dale Hunter, Alex Ovechkin, the greatest goal scorer now of all time, and put him on the right wing. He's not a right winger. He's a left winger. Get over it, Dale Hunter, who did not win the WJC this year, by the way. He's a good coach, but I think we're overcorrecting. And we're being too rigid if we're looking at Rick Tocchet. But most of this falls on the player, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, no, and you know what? The biggest fallacy I've ever heard is like everyone has to get coached the same way. Like that's not true. And I think Tortorella was good with that, where it was like Konechny sometimes could be an absolute fire sale in his own end, but he compensates for it at the other end of the ice, and at least he works. And I understand the frustration of like, okay, you're supposed to be the franchise player and you show up a bit fat and you don't have the best attitude and this and that, or what have you. But if we look at this objectively, Isaiah, and I mean, aside from Bobby Brink, this could theoretically be your middle six for the rest of the season, barring an outside addition, especially if you send Barkey back. So let's say instead of Nikita Grabenkin in the top six, or your Carl Grundstrom, you have Bobby Brink. This is not a top six as currently constructed in my mind that's going to be effective with secondary scoring. Like they need secondary scoring, and I think it was Kevin who said today on Morning Cup of Hockey is that they need Matvei Michkov to be at least some version of Matvei Michkov from last season. And I know that is unfortunately probably the big onus on the player, and you want it to be a merit-based system, but you have to just make do with the situation. And the situation is yes, from a top-line perspective, you don't need to force-feed Michkov because you have Konechny, you have Zegras doing what he's doing, Dvorak overachieving, all that. You've really hit a home run with Dvorak and with Zegras, and I think Konechny's slowly starting to come around. Maybe if you still had Tyson Forster, you could play this game with Michkov a bit, but you don't. Like Bobby Brink is Bobby Brink. Owen Tippett is a streaky player, and I think that now that Barkey isn't in the lineup, it's going to hurt him a bit because Barkey's one of the few guys that could probably play with that pace that Tippett does. And you don't have a center that could really elevate Michkov's game. You don't. And unfortunately, we have seen this story before where you're going to staple him to Sean Couturier. And so look, maybe Michkov, Couturier, and Grundstrom are the best analytical line as far as suppressing chances at 5-on-5. Maybe. And this is a way, but for me, it's just like you're playing safe. These lines tell me, okay, we're going to put Michkov in a position where he hurts us the least, rather than we're going to put him in the position where he could help us the most. That's the way I look at it. It's basically the message that it sends to me is like, he's not going to do anything offensively, so let's just hide him the best we can. It's almost like in a beer league. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's necessarily a fault. I can't blame Tocchet, but if I'm identifying a trait or a trend, it's when things aren't going well with a Rick Tocchet team, his first attempt is to recapture the structure, to reestablish structure. And when you get slaughtered 12-3 in 2 games, I can't say I blame him. It's just in this particular case, you have an ongoing phenomenon. And to sum everything up, there are leaks in the ship. Okay, there is a situation with Michkov. There is the power play. There is the backup goaltending. And then there's the one that I'm going to talk about after I just remind everybody about Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, 40 years of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. You know you want one. So if you live in the area, use DoorDash, Uber Eats, whatever it takes to get that delicious food right to your door. Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And tell them the O&B Puckcast and Flyers Nitty Gritty sent you. Okay. And this show is going on. I knew this would happen. This is going on longer than I thought. But the last thing I want to close with is the one trend the Flyers want to break, if they really want to start trending in a positive direction, is allowing the first goal, which they have done 30 times out of the 44 games that they have played. Get off to better starts would probably be one of the best ways they can seal some of the leaks in the ship, barring an acquisition to address some of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got off to a good start. What was the game that they won last week? Anyway, it's escaping me. But I think you're right, Isaiah, because correct me if you think I'm wrong, but is their 5-on-5 defense still not very impressive for the most part? Maybe not the last 2 games against the Tampa Bay Lightning, but all in all, they've been good at being a lockdown team. So I know that they had a lot of victories early in the season about comebacks and this and that and in the shootout, but that's kind of withered away. And I think that's come with teams tightening up as the season goes on. And I think it's also probably a fact that the secondary scoring has dried up a little bit because Tyson Forster's gone and that initial spark plug of Denver Barkey has kind of worn out a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I think that, barring the last 2 games, which, I mean, you can't just completely ignore them, but that 5-on-5 defense has probably been their strong suit all season long, aside from Dan Vladar and Trevor Zegras. And if you could get ahead of the 8 ball early and then really hone in on your overall defensive structure, and I haven't checked the metrics, but I imagine they're still around the top 5 in 5-on-5 defensive, like suppressing chances. I think that is conducive to winning because we know Dan Vladar could play at a high level. Again, maybe not the last game or so, but I don't think that this team, we just kind of berated the middle 6 and how we don't think that they're going to get a lot of secondary scoring. If you're not going to get a lot of secondary scoring, but you're a good 5-on-5 defensive team and even a good penalty killing team, it probably is the best recipe to succeed is to get out early and then slowly lock the game down, easy enough for me to say, as the game plays out.
Yeah, no, I think this is a team with it's not a perfect team. They need centers. They need a power play quarterback. They need net front presence. They need a better backup goalie. And if that sounds like a recipe to miss the playoffs, it's possible. And I think over the next 12 games, I think it is the inflection point in the season for the Philadelphia Flyers. And it'll be very interesting to watch what the front office does about it. Dan.
It's all good.
Yeah, all good. So, Anthony, what other things are on your mind as far as we wrap this episode up here, this special O&B Puckcast special?
I just think that I wonder how, I guess, between now and the Olympic break, we have 2-3 weeks left, more or less.
Oh yeah.
Where this team plays, like how they play out, and then what it means for the trade deadline. Ristolainen, Charlie talked about how he doesn't think that he's probably going to be one of the biggest targets, which, I mean, I don't think so at all either. But again, and I believe Charlie mentioned this yesterday on his show, in a league right now with so much parity and very few sellers, if Ristolainen is one of the few defensive guys on the market, is someone going to pay like a Brandon Carlo price? And are the Flyers going to be in a position to sell off if they don't like the record between now and, let's say, the Olympic break? And the other part kind of goes hand in hand with it is, will they be in a position to be a buyer beyond the goaltending? Are you going to look at adding maybe a middle six forward or a fourth line center because Denver Barkey isn't cutting it and he's back in the AHL? But again, at the right cost. Like, I don't think the Flyers are going to blow the doors off for a top rental. And I don't even know if there are top rentals this year. Like, I mean, Kiefer Sherwood's trying to be re-signed by the Canucks right now. And that's how a guy that does it. Exactly. That's how a guy who does it for me. Like, so it's, it's very, like, it's weird because it's just like, you don't really know who's on the market. You don't know which teams are selling. I mean, you could look at the Calgary Flames because the Flames are always that team that people are just like, yeah, they're going to sell off. But with their ownership being so volatile, for lack of better words, I think Craig Conroy is very much in a peculiar position a little bit. But I mean, I think it's just my eyes are on what this team does, and are they more in a seller's mode, in a buyer's mode, or if they do a little bit of both. Like, the one thought I had is that if you move off of Ristolainen, even if you are in a playoff position, right? You move off of Ristolainen, but you still want to maybe you're still looking to maybe like contend for the playoffs. Do you look at bringing in, let's say, a Luke Schenn from the Winnipeg Jets, who kind of could do a little bit of what Ristolainen does and is on an expiring contract and would like to, maybe get a better opportunity at this stage of his career? And do you maybe look at like, okay, like, we're going to go out and we're going to take a flyer on a Gus Nyquist, like, along with Luke Schenn, and like get for like a couple of mid-round picks? And do you do something like that? Or do you look at Cole Perfetti, who's having another boring, not great season, and you take a flyer on him? But if you're getting Cole Perfetti, especially a team for Winnipeg who has such a hard time retaining players, then that's probably more of a significant cost that you're paying, especially for a seasoned GM like Kevin Cheveldayoff. But that's something that I've kind of wondered about, that even if the Flyers do kind of right the ship here and they're more solidified in the playoff race, do they move off of Ristolainen even in the playoff race? And do they look to replace him with like a quasi Eric Johnson type of acquisition? And if you look at the Winnipeg Jets, who are in free fall mode, maybe it's like one of those situations where you try and buy low on some of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, you could take the tack that they will try to acquire assets, whether it's a young player who they think fits into their long-term plan, or whether they just want draft assets who could be used in a summer trade. One way or another, I could see them doing that. And
yeah,
backfilling with, you talked about like a Schenn. I think most people want a solution to some of these areas of vulnerability on the power play with backup goaltending. I really, or a long-term piece that solves some of the problems the Flyers have at center on defense. And
yeah, like, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
like, look, like a Cole Perfetti, and again, we're just spitballing here. And I don't know if Winnipeg's in a hurry to move off of a Perfetti who is an RFA at the end of the year. But he's another guy that it's like, is that, and not to, throw shade at Trevor Zegras, but is he another guy that's just like, is he a wing? Is he a center? Like, they have enough wingers to fill out two decent NHL teams,
I don't
between
think
now and the next
I don't
2
think
years.
he's a center. That's the problem, It's like,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that, he does have that pedigree. He's coming off of a 50-point year in 82 games. And look, I do think that a lot of the issues in Winnipeg, much like in Philadelphia, I think a lot of the issues in Winnipeg come from the fact that their second and third line centers are probably the two worst in the NHL, 1-2 punch or 2-3 punch. Like, they're getting next to no offense from Jonathan Toews. Adam Lowry is pretty much like maybe a slightly better version of Noah Cates. So I think that that's maybe a similar issue that's going on in Philadelphia that's happening in Winnipeg. where your centers just aren't doing enough to pull the best out of these wingers. So it's like, it's very bizarre. So like maybe you give a third and a fourth round pick for Luke Shen and Gus Nyquist, something like that. Like that's just a thought that maybe they could do. But and I don't know, like Gus Nyquist, who did he go to? Was it Minnesota last year? I think he showed up on. And I mean, Nyquist has had spurts here and there, but it's like, again, like these are just kind of like, they're, like you said, they're backfilling.
They're Band-Aids. That's the problem. They're Band-Aids.
Yeah, they're Band-Aids.
Yeah. I can see a Luke Shen backfill.
But are you going to find...
What's that?
Yeah, like, and like, yeah, no, but that's it. Like, and it's also like, I don't think they're going to find like that second line or that first line center now. Like I forget who I was talking about this with, just like a buddy. Like, a lot of people have been asking about Robert Thomas.
Yes.
And like, look, St. Louis is a very hard team to read. I asked like several league executives about it. They all said no, like, but if he was available, a lot of teams would be lining up for him. Then I asked an agent about it, and he said, yeah, I've heard that he is available, but for a king's ransom. But nobody really knows what Doug Armstrong's doing because he's so preoccupied with Team Canada. And it was also mentioned to me that Armstrong's probably trying to preserve his legacy before he gives up the GM job to Alex Steen and goes full-time to being the president of hockey ops. I just think that Doug Armstrong is in a very peculiar spot, and St. Louis is always weird. They're in that, like, you re-sign Broberg, you're trying to turn it over to guys like Holloway and Dalibor Dvorsky and Neighbors and Snugerud. And, like, it's just like, are you going to have to overpay and pay through the nose for Robert Thomas, who's a very good player, but is he like
the 14th, 15th best number one center in the league in that range?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, one guy that I was just spitballing with a buddy about was Matty Beniers and like what he could do. Like, and because I look at Seattle, and Seattle's one of those organizations that you don't hear much come out of there. You take Jake O'Brien with the 8th overall pick this year, who did make Team Canada, but is having a good season. And I believe he's playing with Jet Luchenko in Brantford, if I'm not mistaken. And you have Berkeley Catton, who's playing actually on the left wing with Shane Wright. You have Chandler Stevenson signed till the end of time. And in my head, I'm saying, like, man, like, and I asked the Flyers source about Beniers, and they said, yeah, we like Beniers, but not at that contract. I actually don't think the contract's that bad. I think he makes $7.1 million. But again, this is all just spitballing. But I'm like, I've said this a few times, and I'll say it again. I think you have to come to a point here where you have to use one of Tyson Foerster or Porter Martone to go get a center like this. And even if Porter Martone, then I'm just using him because his stock is so high and so through the roof because of his season in the NCAA. Even if a Porter Martone turns out to be a Matthew Tkachuk light and a Matty Beniers turns into be, let's say, like, I don't know, what a Robert Thomas-ish, it's wing to center type of thing. And like, imagine you put Matty Beniers between Tyson Foerster and Matvei Michkov, and then your second line is, Zegras, Dvorak, and Konechny, and then you have, let's say, Tippett, Cates, and Denver Barkey on your third line, or whoever. Again, this is just spitballing. I just think that that's probably a trade for the offseason, but B, I think like you're going to probably have to look at options like that where, like I can see it right now. If they traded Porter, and I don't think they want to trade Porter Martone, this is just my opinion, but if they traded Porter Martone, let's say 1-for-1 for Matty Beniers, there would probably be a riot. But the thing is like, I think that's the only way you're going to get a center like that. Because, Isaiah, I ask you, if you're an opposing team, what player do you want if you're giving up a 1A, 1B center?
Yeah, I mean, the best prospect the Flyers have is Porter Martone. I'm not really that impressed with Luchenko, and not to get off on that. He's by far and away the most attractive piece that they have to offer because they're draft picks. Even if you give 2 number ones, they're not going to really be that high. So I think that's where they're at right now. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't think they're going to give up on Michkov.
Yeah, they can. Just from an optics point of view, you can.
Yeah.
You could do Forster, like, and like, look, I know that they don't want to move off. They're feeling like, okay, Forster, Martone, Michkov are the guys that you're building around, and that's all fantastic. But like, you have a lot of wingers coming, and yeah, you can move off Bobby Brink, and everyone's saying like, oh, just get rid of Tippett, get rid of Tippett, get rid of Tippett. But like, what do you think Owen Tippett's getting you? And personally, I don't mind having Tippett at $6.2 million for the foreseeable future, even if he's just a 25 goal, 50-point guy. Like, I think $6.2 million, like, I know everyone says like, oh, it's a bad contract. I think it's a very good contract. And if you move off Owen Tippett, like, what's the best player you're getting? Maybe like I just don't know. Like, you're not getting a top six or certainly not a top line centerman. Yeah. That's for sure. Like, I just look at it like, you have a lot of wingers. You don't want to move off Michkov because just optically, and you need him to pan out. Forster or Martone, in my opinion, would get you a significant haul. And again, I'm not saying that Beniers is available. I'm not saying the Flyers want to do this. Everything I've heard is that they don't. It's just that if it were me, I would be looking around the league and saying like, okay, Seattle, for instance, you have Shane Wright, you have Berkeley Catton, who can play center as well. You signed Chandler Stevenson until the end of time. You have Jake O'Brien coming. Would you do a Martone for Matty Beniers swap? And I think that is something that if I were the Flyers, I'd be looking to do, in my opinion. Because Beniers, I think, has proven that it's probably a standalone 50-point guy. And I wonder what he could do if he was between like a Michkov and a Forster or a Zegras and a Konechny. Again, that's just my opinion. And from Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say because look, he's 6'2", he's got good size. He's not the biggest frame. But so he's probably in a 185, 190 pound. That's fine. His skating, I think he's a pretty good skater. He's not outstanding, but he's a good player and he's a good two-way player from what I understand. But I don't think he's only 23, so it's not, it's not a name that would excite people. People were probably like Robert Thomas, who's done more in the league. And he was on a 19 cup team, wasn't he? He was a 17
he was
draft
certainly pick, right there.
He was in the Patrick draft.
Yeah, like, look, I spoke to Doug Armstrong. Okay, it was 24 months ago, right? I was still with the fourth period. I wrote an article on it. I'll try and find it and post it. And like, back then, they were trying to pass it over from the O'Reillys and Jaden Schwartz and that whole like group. They were trying to pass it over to Thomas and Kyrou. And Armstrong fully told me on the record, he said, we're not a team that could really rebuild. I think that they went on a bit of a heroic run last season under Jim Montgomery, but now they've kind of settled back down to earth. And yeah, you want to move off of Jordan Kyrou. I don't have an interest in Jordan Kyrou because I think he's a winger. I don't think he's a centerman. And based on my understanding is, Robert Thomas had been being groomed to be the next captain of that team under Braden Shen's tutelage and all that. And yes, maybe now they're more open to the idea, but we know that Doug Armstrong's going to drive a hard bargain. And if he is trying to preserve a legacy, which an agent suggested to me, and he is very preoccupied with Team Canada, I don't want to pay through the nose for Robert Thomas. I don't know about you. And he is, I think he's 26 years old, 27 years old.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, Isaiah. It's just
he's been a point of game player. That's something Bernier. If you think Berniers is going to be a 70, 80-point player, then you go for Berniers. He's younger, but he hasn't done it.
Lower
so
money.
And the cost would be less. So
yeah, you got to kind of wait.
These are not real sexy names. I got to be honest with you. But listen, they could have look. And this is the draft analyst, our buddy Steve Cornianos. He said, "Why didn't they just take Higgins? He needs a center." And the question becomes,
or Jake O'Brien.
They didn't think Higgins is necessarily a center, and they think Porter Martone is going to be a better player.
Yeah, and okay, like, and I understand the whole best player available thing. I get it 100%, but a lot of times when you just go best player available, and I don't really subscribe to that as much as most people. But okay, you go best player available, that's fantastic. But now you're in a situation like this where even a Jake O'Brien, who again, okay, he didn't make Team Canada, whatever, but I think has put on very good numbers with Brantford. He's probably a slam dunk center, and now you're not really having this conversation. But like, look at the trickle down effect. And okay, it's probably a good problem to have with Porter Martone being as good as he is in the NCAA. But now all of a sudden you're saying, like, okay, so we got to make room for Martone. So let's move off Owen Tippett. But if you're moving off Owen Tippett, you're not really getting good value for him because it's just like he is just a middle six center. And I think a lot of players like Owen Tippett are typically more valuable to you on your roster than via trade, because what is the easiest thing to go out and get on the trade market? Like, aside from depth, like backfilling type of players, it is middle six scoring wingers. But I think there's value to having an Owen Tippett. I've always compared him to like a Joffrey Lupul type of impact player. Mm-hmm. Like, Lupul was just that guy that could tag in on the top line sometimes, like he did for Toronto alongside Bozak and Kessel, but mostly found that niche in the middle six. Like, when I think a line he excelled with was Umberger, Richards, and Lupul in the 2008 playoffs as like their quasi second line. So it's just, yeah, you're right, because had you just taken Jake O'Brien or had you just taken James Hagan, we're not having this conversation. But now you're saying, like, at least in my opinion, I love Forster, I love Martone from what I've seen and what I've heard, but like, you need a centerman. You do. And like, I think that Dvorak has proven if he plays at this level, you could probably get by with him as a 2C, right? Would you be comfortable with that? Like,
when a playoff team, fine. If a team that's a cup contender, you better have a lot around him because he's more of a third line center type, you know.
Yeah, so let's say you have Zegras. Let's say your first line right now is your second line: Zegras, Dvorak, and Konechny. Your third line is Tippett, Couturier, Cates, and I don't think Bobby Brink is long for Philadelphia, so let's say either Bump or Denver Barkey. Okay? And your top line is Forster, Beniers, and Michkov. I think that is a team that you could at least see the framework. But without that middle six center, I just don't see it. And then let's look at the alternative. You keep Martone, but you get rid of, let's say you jettison Owen Tippett. Okay, so now you have Martone, Cates, and Martone, Couturier, Michkov. You have Zegras, Dvorak, Konechny, and Forster. Then you have Forster. Like, yeah, you're loaded on the wings 100%. But you still have guys like Martone and Michkov playing with Sean Couturier or Noah Cates on top lines.
It's like, killer. It's killer.
Yeah. It would be awesome to have Tyson Forster on the third line as a depth role. And let's say you're just like, oh, we're gonna roll it back with Forster, Cates, and Brink as like this great third line, but it's not going anywhere because Sean Couturier is gonna get bowled over as a first line center. Like, I'd rather parlay a Forster or a Martone into a guy that could knock everyone down a totem pole a little bit and give at least a formidable center to play with a Michkov and a Forster. And like we said earlier, it's just like Michkov is your crown jewel. And if you have to make some moves to cater to him, you have to do it. Like that this is just my opinion. Like, yes, you have a bunch of really good wingers. That's awesome. But it's not just about like moving off guys like Brink and Tippett for pennies on the dollar just to make room for Martone and Bump and Zeke and Barkey. I think you legitimately have to find ways to improve the team while moving. Like, I want to see a hockey trade. I don't want to see Tippett traded for like a second round pick and, you know, a fourth line center.
No, they'll get a player or a first round pick. Look, Tippett is real important right now with Forster out of the lineup. They don't have a lot of shooters, and Tippett sometimes can't hit the side of a barn. I get it. But his speed, at least he can create something. He's really good at zone entries. I mean, he gives the power play like a prayer when he's out there because he can, you know, enter the zone. He can make stuff happen. I know he's frustrating as hell. You know, he's like a poor man's Jeff Carter in a lot of ways.
But, yeah, and look, he is frustrating, but like sometimes, like a player just is what he is. And I'm not gonna lose my mind that Tippett is like, I know there was that stretch where everyone was kind of hoping for him to get to that next level and become the 30-goal guy. But I also think that was during a period where, like, you know, Zegras wasn't here, Michkov wasn't here, like Forster was just breaking in. Like, Tippett for a season or two was kind of like that sexy new toy, like, oh, the big piece from the Claude Giroux deal. And he is an exciting player when he's on. But like I said, like sometimes you're just like that middle six player. And I think he's a really good utility player. And I also think that Tippett is someone that hasn't really had, and I'm not excusing this from him, but hasn't really had the right players to gel with. Like, I think he plays a type of role and a pace that sometimes he just has to do it on his own, and that's where he becomes a volume shooter and shit like that. Oh, pardon me.
Yeah, that's all right.
But again, like that's why I think he clicked with Barkey, because Barkey was able to play with that pace. And even now with these lines, like what are you expecting Owen Tippett to do with Gulbenkian and Noah Cates? Like what? Like maybe Gulbenkian could play with that pace, and Gulbenkian could kind of try and clean up the garbage with Tippett taking a bunch of shots on net. But I just think like I don't know. Like it's just my point is that Martone is great, Forster's great, but those are guys that are really going to strike the fancy of a lot of teams. And even if Martone is like Matthew Tkachuk light in the future, let's just say hypothetically, he's Matthew Tkachuk light. Do you want a Matthew Tkachuk light, or do you want like a centerman who's, let's say, a Nick Suzuki light in Matty Beniers? Like that, and center always outweighs wing. And I just look at the team with a Matty Beniers, how it looks compared to a team with a Martone or a Tyson Forster.
No, look, I hear you. I hear you. A power forward has been a need for this team, and since I don't know. I mean,
peak Wayne Simmons.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm going back to LeClaire. I mean, that's a perennial all-star. But after LeClaire era, you had Carter, wasn't really a power forward, didn't kind of play that game. You had Hartnell was a power forward. He's a pretty good player, like, but in the 20s, he had that one season where he scored 37 goals in 2012 or something.
Yeah, with Yager and
that was amazing. That was a fun year. But it's been a while. But they need centers. So I'd be willing to do what it takes to get a center. There's got to be a young guy who still has room for growth, you know.
Well, but that's why maybe I lean more to, and it's also the cost, because I would bet money that Armstrong is going to want way more than Botterhill would want for Beniers, and it is a 3-year difference or a 2-year difference. But yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of beat this horse down enough here, and I think everyone knows where we stand.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, the one guy's more accomplished, but if you believe in the upside of Matty Beniers, I know it's somebody Russ Cohen has a lot of faith in. He had like kind of, come back down to earth. Was it last year or the year before? But yeah, he's a good player. We'll see how it goes, man. It's an interesting topic, and it's the dilemma that Briere has created with some of the decisions they made. So it'll be very interesting. So, you get the last word before we wrap up for tonight.
Well, I just think that it's a wait and see right now between now and the Olympic break. I think that's when we're really going to get an idea as to where this team is headed. Obviously, the backup goaltender is a very, I guess, it's a focal point right now, and we're going to see what Ersing could do with another starter or two. Obviously, depends on what's on the market. Obviously, there aren't a ton of goaltenders around. But I mean, the conversation that we just had about the centers and Beniers and Thomas, I just feel like that's more of an off-season conversation. But I just think the Flyers' last 2 games and how they got kind of bowled over in some capacity by the Lightning, I think it was kind of like a humbling moment for them, and I want to see how they respond tonight. And again, I want to see beyond the goaltending in this. I'm really curious about this middle six, Isaiah. I don't know. This middle six to me is very I'm not sure about it, but I mean, we beat that to death. So that's kind of like where my eyes are on right now, is how that middle six is going to play out.
That's fine. And people can find your work at dailyfaceoff.com, and people can follow you on X at DiMarco25.
Exactly.
Okay. And they can find your articles at dailyfaceoff.com. What's next on the docket?
I'm not too sure yet. It is coming on Friday. Tuesdays are usually my Friday piece, Tuesdays are usually my Flyers piece. Fridays are usually league-wide. I'm thinking of a couple different directions. Not too sure if it'll be like an opinion column or more of like a source article, but we'll see. But definitely look out for this Friday on dailyfaceoff.com.
You got it. So listen, you can follow the O&B Puckcast on X and Bluesky at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck, on GETTR at O&B Puckcast, and of course, several podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible. Of course, we're on Facebook and YouTube. Just type in there O&B Puckcast. It helps move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. Always follow or subscribe. It really helps. And we appreciate it. So we took it to the night. I didn't know if we were going to make it to the evening, but we did. So thanks for joining us tonight. Next week, we should be back with a special guest. And until next time, everybody, take care.